Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the SAREUM Holdings PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just please simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll, and if you give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand over to Non-Executive Chairman, Dr. Stephen Parker. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and good morning to everybody on the line. Very welcome to join us for this update as a result of the recent CTA submission and our period ends at the end of June. Tim Mitchell, our CEO, will take you through the headlines, and then John Reader, our CSO, will talk in a little bit more depth about the science side, and then it'll be thrown over to questions at the end of that. So if you've already submitted questions, we will try and get through as many as we can. If you haven't, there is the opportunity to do so, although at short notice we may have to hold questions on the day and submit them back as written answers via the website and the RNS at a later stage. So with that, I'll hand over to Tim Mitchell.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our presentation today. As Stephen said, you may have noticed last week we announced via RNS that we've submitted the CTA, that's the Clinical Trials Authorization application for our SDC 1801 autoimmune disease candidate. And really the purpose of this meeting is to give a little bit more details around that program and to answer any questions you have. So as Stephen said, presenting today is myself, Tim Mitchell, the Chief Executive and one of the co-founders, and John Reader, Chief Scientific Officer and the other co-founder of the company. For those of you who are new to the company, then I'll start with a quick overview. We're a clinical stage small molecule drug development company developing next generation kinase inhibitors. So kinases are a class of cellular machinery that regulate many biological processes. And we have a particular focus on autoimmune diseases and cancers. So we're led by a highly experienced team with particular expertise in kinase inhibition, decades of experience in general R&D, and also in public company management. Our current drug development pipeline is focused on the JAK cell signaling family, and we'll talk in a bit more detail about that later. It comprises 4 members: TYK2, JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, and they're all important in maintaining healthy immune systems. So our strategy is to develop these programs into the late preclinical or early clinical stages before we license or partner them with a pharmaceutical major. And while we do that, we maintain a lean cost base. We have a small executive team, and we use trusted third-party providers to maximize our return on investment. So some of our recent highlights are shown here. As I said, well, the main focus is on SDC 1801. This is the TYK2 JAK1 inhibitor for autoimmune diseases. We've noted in the RNS that we've got a particular focus now on psoriasis, which is a skin disease. So the CTA application for a phase 1a/b clinical trial was submitted last week. So the plan is to initiate clinical trials firstly in healthy volunteers, so that we can understand the dose levels and any safety issues with the compound, and then in psoriasis patients. And we're looking to start this trial by the end of this year. So we'll look to dose up to 120 volunteers and patients in total, and we'll recruit these at a site in Manchester in England. Earlier in the year, we announced that the toxicology studies to start these trials had been completed. We were waiting on the drug products and the drug substance. So the drug substance, that's the sort of the raw material, 1801 material, that's now complete. The capsule formulation that the volunteers and patients will actually take, that's also been completed and is currently undergoing quality control. So we're on track for this year-end start. And then just a couple of points on SDC 1802. So this is a separate molecule that also targets TYK2 and JAK1. This is our cancer and cancer immunotherapy program. We're continuing to undertake our translational studies just to work out in which particular cancers we should best use this compound. And then we also noted that the IP portfolio has been strengthened with the granting of a patent in the European Union. And then for the SRA 737 CHEK1 program, so this is a program that was licensed to Sierra Oncology. The news here is that Sierra have been acquired by GSK, and that was in April this year. So we're waiting to hear from GSK as to what their plans are for any future development of SRA 737, and obviously we'll update you as soon as we hear anything from them. And then also in the RNS of last week, we noted our year-end financial position, so cash of 4.3 million. Okay, so let's move on to our JAK programs, so the TYK2 JAK1 programs, where we have our particular kinase inhibition expertise, and I'll hand over to John to take you through that.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so JAK family, as Tim has alluded to, is very important in the signaling of key immunoregulatory cytokines, so helps to maintain this healthy, balanced immune system. The two members of the family of particular interest to us, TYK2 and JAK1, they are involved in a signaling pathway that is frequently deregulated in multiple autoimmune diseases, one of which is psoriasis, and will be the focus of our phase 1b trial. The inhibition of both TYK2 and JAK1 has the potential to give superior efficacy compared with agents that block just one of the two kinases. If you look at the cartoon, you'll see, for example, that interferon alpha, the third cytokine from the left there, uses both TYK2 and JAK1. And by inhibiting both of those, we think we can have a really profound inhibition of that interferon alpha signaling pathway. TYK2 and JAK1 are therefore optimal targets for autoimmune diseases. Targeting the two other members of the JAK family, JAK2 and JAK3, has led to some unwanted side effects in patients. So from the beginning, we've been keen to avoid inhibition of those two kinases, and SDC 1801 has the right balance of potency and cell activity amongst the JAK family that we were looking for. So the inhibition of these two kinases is of great interest in the industry and increasing interest. There's a lot of activity, a large amount of commercial focus on the JAK family as a whole, and strong clinical validation from big players such as BMS and Pfizer for TYK2 selective and dual TYK2 JAK1 molecules in both psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. There's a number of mid and late stage clinical trials of the TYK2 and dual inhibitors from BMS. The Pfizer molecule, which has been picked up by a new company called Priovant, and they have trials ongoing in lupus, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, vitiligo and dermatomyositis, so a range of dermal and other autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. Readouts are expected over the next 2 or 3 years. There's also scientific evidence for a role in the modulation of the severe inflammatory responses and respiratory symptoms arising from viral infections, such as COVID-19. And 2 JAK family inhibitors are already approved for certain COVID-19 patients. And I mentioned the growing commercial focus. BMS are forecasting sales in excess of $4 billion for their TYK2 inhibitor, deucravacitinib, in 2029. So as you know, we're focused on selective and potent TYK2/JAK1 inhibitors. There are significant opportunities available to us in this area. Currently, no marketed products with selectivity for TYK2. So it's a recent target for therapeutic intervention. There are very few dual TYK2/JAK1 inhibitors in clinical trials, so we have a nicely differentiated product. And there are no selective TYK2 inhibitors in clinical trials for cancer, which gives us a first-in-class opportunity for SDC-1802. So both of our molecules, SDC-1801 and SDC-1802, are potent and selective inhibitors of both TYK2 and JAK1. They have a favorable selectivity profile against JAK2 and JAK3, in contrast with some of the early first-generation JAK inhibitors such as tofacitinib and baricitinib. The molecules have a potential for once-daily oral dosing in humans, and we should start to get early on in the phase 1A process for SDC-1801. We'll get to see exactly how the pharmacokinetic profile of 1801 is looking, and that will inform us on the dosing schedule. And we also have a strong IP portfolio protecting both candidates in all of the key territories and markets. So this slide gives a snapshot of our pipeline as it stands at the moment. You'll see our proprietary programs, SDC-1801 and 1802. 1801 is at the end of its preclinical phase, and hopefully with a favourable response from NHRA, we'll be entering clinical phase 1 before the end of this year. SDC-1802 is a little further behind, and we continue our translational studies. And then below you'll see SRA737 now in the hands of GSK, but important to remember that it's completed 2 clinical phase 2 studies in solid tumours as a monotherapy and combination, and showed a very good safety profile and some signs of efficacy, which we're hoping will encourage GSK to take this molecule further. In terms of our development timeline then, the internal focus, as mentioned, is on progressing SDC-1801 into our first-in-human phase 1A/B clinical trial. The initial focus is on psoriasis, and the clinical studies will be conducted at a single specialist centre in Manchester. You can see in the timeline, Q3 2022, we were able to file our CTA. And as Tim mentioned, we've completed the manufacture of the capsules for the clinical trial, and they're just going through their final QC process before they are released to the clinical unit. In Q4 2022, then the big objective is to initiate that phase 1A clinical trial, subject to approval from MHRA and the Ethics Committee. And then that trial is scheduled to go through 2023. We aim to complete the phase 1A during 2023 and initiate the phase 1B clinical trial in patients. And then we're hoping we'll have all of the data and completion of that clinical trial hopefully early in 2024. But that's very much subject to successful recruitment and progress and funding. Just briefly on SDC-1802 then, targeting multiple cancers here. It's demonstrated good efficacy in immunotherapy disease models against many cancers. The anti-tumour effects have been seen in models of, for example, kidney, colorectal, skin cancers and B-cell lymphoma. We've got strong evidence that SDC-1802 acts through a novel immunotherapeutic mechanism. And again, we're dosing orally here, seeing positive results using SDC-1802 as a monotherapy and in combination with a number of chemotherapeutic agents. Our recent patent grants strengthen the IP portfolio in the major territories. And as we've mentioned, translational studies are ongoing to define the optimal cancer application. So these involve additional biomarker studies to better understand the mechanism of action, and that will help us to identify the ideal patient population for the phase 1 studies, the population with the best chance of responding to our molecule. And once we have this in place, we'll be completing our toxicology and manufacturing studies. And I think the experience we have in developing SDC 1801 will greatly aid the development of 1802. They have a very similar chemical structure. A lot of the synthetic steps are identical, so we already have optimized process chemistry for those steps. I think we'll be able to move 1802 more rapidly through these toxicology and manufacturing studies in the future. And just a reminder of 737, where it stood before the GSK acquisition of Sierra. This is from one of Sierra's presentations from March earlier this year. You can see lots of opportunities for SRA 737. Sierra were talking about combinations with a BET inhibitor that they in-licensed called SRA 515. Also opportunities for combinations with immuno-oncology agents, and gemcitabine. So we're just waiting to hear what GSK will do about this. Obviously, as soon as we know something, we'll pass that on to our shareholders. But there's a $550,000 approximately, $550,000 milestone payment to us upon first patient dosed in the next clinical trial, and still a total of nearly $80 million in total milestone payments. And additionally, there are royalties due if SRA 737 gets on the market. So I'll hand back to Tim at this point to just conclude the presentation before we move on to the Q&A.
Thank you, John. Yes, so to remind everyone of then the potential value inflection points that we can look forward to over the next 3 months through this year. So we talked about a mid-year date for the CTA submission, and as you'll have noticed, we did that at the end of July. We've selected the initial indication for the phase 1b clinical trial. That's psoriasis. So the next event we're looking for is the approval of the CTA by MHRA. So that's the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority. And I mean, that's slightly out of our control, but we are hoping that we'll have that in time for the start of the phase 1a clinical trial by the end of this year. So we'll have the trial start to announce, and then any updates on preclinical progress with SDC 1802. And then for check 1, as John has alluded to, then we've seen that the acquisition offer has been approved by Sierra shareholders. We're now looking to see any news from SRA 737. Obviously, we can't divulge anything that GSK haven't put into the public domain, so we're waiting for public announcements on that. And then any milestone payments, should GSK choose to progress 737, we will look forward to the milestone payments on the first patient's dose in any new clinical trials. So looking for plenty of important preclinical and clinical progress from the 3 programs here, so 1801, 1802, and 737. Okay, so that's the formal part of the presentation concluded. If I hand back to Mark for a minute to...
Yeah, that's great, Tim. Tim, John, Stephen, thank you very much indeed for updating investors this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of the screen. That's why the company take a few moments to prepare for the questions submitted today. I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. Jessica, if I may just hand back to you. As you can see, you've received a number of questions ahead of today's event, along with a number throughout today's meeting. And if I may just hand back to you to read out the questions for the team to respond to, and then I'll pick up from you at the end.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining, for your interest today. So I'm going to read some of the questions which have been submitted, and then I'll invite Tim and the team to respond. And just to say, we'll try to ask as many questions as possible, but you'll appreciate there's a lot. If we're not able to respond live, we'll do so after the meeting in written form. So please bear with us on this. So question one, question regarding SDC 1801 clinical trials. How long until the CTA is approved? And then beyond the approval, what are the lead times before the first patient is dosed? So, Tim, if I could hand over to you on that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Yes, so I think we've covered some of this in today's presentation. Then, so we're so say the CTA approval, we can't really give a firm date on because it's dependent on the MHRA. But based on previous experience, particularly with the consulting company we're using, we're expecting to get that approval in time for the clinical trial start. So we're putting everything in place to start recruiting patients pretty much as soon as we've got that approval, and we're hoping that will all be done by the end of the year. In terms of how long the trial will take, again, that's slightly dependent on how quickly the Manchester unit can recruit patients. But as John noted, the phase 1A part we're hoping to conclude during next year.
Thanks, Tim. Second question, excellent news on the CTA submission. For many years now, the company has been stating an objective to find licensing partners. Are you able to share the number of potential interested parties in the last 12 months who've shown an interest?
So I can't really speculate on the number of interested parties we're talking to, but we talk to potential partners all the time as part of our normal course of business. So we have an ongoing dialogue that continues with a number of interested parties. And I think that's really all I can say about it for now.
Thanks. So the next question is about consolidation. When previously asked on the reasoning behind consolidation, the response was that at a higher consolidation price, there would be more likelihood of institutional interest. How has this strategy played out since consolidation?
Shall I pick that one up? This is Stephen. The answer, quite simply, is that you don't flick a switch on the markets and everything immediately runs as you would like them to. Over time, I'm quite convinced that the decision to consolidate the shares will prove to be the right one. But of course, you have to remember that we're not isolated. We're part of a sector and we're part of a market. And as everybody knows, the last 12 months in this market and in this sector has been pretty damn bloody. Interestingly, we're actually running at about halfway down the scale of performance in the sector at the moment. So whilst clearly I'd like it to be better, I'm conscious that it certainly could be worse.
Thanks, Stephen. The next is a question about 737, and we've had a number of questions on this topic, so I'll try and consolidate these as far as possible. And the question essentially is, has the board requested any information from GSK on its intentions and obligations under the original Sierra agreement?
I'll pick this one up again. The SAREUM Holdings PLC does not have an agreement either with Sierra or now with GSK. The agreement for licensing the drug was done through Cancer Research, and we have an agreement with Cancer Research which gives us the 37.5% economics of the agreement. So we are simply not in a position to, or we have no status to go to GSK and ask these questions. Those questions have to come from the licensing partner, which is Cancer Research. We are in active conversations with Cancer Research to make sure that is happening, but we are simply not in a position to pick up the phone or any other means to GSK and ask those questions.
Thank you. So the next question is about what activities are being carried out prior to any response on the CTA from MHRA. Possibly, Tim, a question for you.
John, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, can do. Yeah. I mean, it's really a case of, with respect to 1801, it's getting all of the final details in for the clinical plans with the unit in Manchester. So as part of the CTA application, we've drawn up the protocol that will be used in the clinical plan. It's a very detailed document, extends to over 100 pages. But once that's in place, you then have to break down every single activity within that clinical plan to make sure that the clinical unit know exactly what it is that we're asking them to do. And so it's really, that's the ongoing task there. We've got to make sure that all of our internal procedures are absolutely, 100%. It's conceivable that MHRA will come and inspect us, and so obviously we want to make sure that we're prepared for that event. And I think the other one is we're finalising the quality control checks on the capsules. That's all going ahead of schedule and looking good so far, but that needs to complete before the capsules are sent off to the clinical unit. So it's really that. And then 1802, we've talked about the ongoing translational studies.
Thanks, John. So we have a few questions about cash and cash runway. What runway does the current approximately 4 million provide, and how is this expected to be used over the next 2 years is the first question. So I might ask Tim to take that one now.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so the main focus is still the clinical trials on SDC 1801. So as we said in the RNS and as we've alluded to in today's presentation, then that we're funded for the phase 1A part, but we would require additional funding to complete the psoriasis phase 1B trial. So I think that's the answer there. And then I think there was some further questions about clinical development of 1802, and that would also, to take SDC 1802 into the clinic, that would also require further funding.
Thank you. And I think there was a further question on the current estimates of the cost of phase 1B as well, Tim.
Yeah, I think we will. Can we just make sure we got that one right and provide a written answer to that, if that's okay?
Of course. So the next question was, after the results from the CTA have been received, what are the intentions in relation to progressing the COVID potential of 1801? And what would the steps be to progress this?
Okay, so the phase 1A part of the trial will provide safety and dosing information that will be applicable for any trial. So the first part in healthy volunteers will look out for any safety issues, and we'll get a feel for how often we have to dose for and what dose levels can be maintained at the various dosing schedules that we'll try. So that would be that information can be applied to any trials in any disease where 1801 is taken as an oral capsule, so including COVID-19. But I think, so we know that TYK2/JAK1 inhibition is demonstrated very, very good benefits in psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. So we think there's a strong rationale for the initial focus on psoriasis there. And then once we have that data, we'll consider any other diseases which may or may not include COVID.
Thanks, Tim. Next question is around impacts of the current geopolitical and economic situation on SAREUM.
I'll take this one. I suppose it's an operational one, really, isn't it? I mean, nothing really. We're just focused on our drug development. Most of our work's with CROs. The clinical trial, as we've said, will take place in the UK. Much of our recent work on the drug substance and drug product has also been done in the UK. So, we're sheltered from currency issues, if any. So nothing really that I can think of.
Thanks. There's another question about a sale of shares by directors. And the question specifically is, does this activity not run contrary to the board's expectations of SAREUM and its potential? So possibly a question there for Stephen.
Yes, you're referring to a recent sale which was carried out by Tim and by John, which was linked to options which were running out of date. Now, the previous year, both gentlemen had actually lost options because there wasn't an opportunity to trade them within an unlocked period. And so on this particular occasion, it was felt that it was fair to allow them to trade because otherwise they would simply have lost these options they've been holding over the lifetime of them. We don't expect that to be a frequent occurrence, but on that instance, that was why the board felt it was appropriate to let them do so.
Thank you, Stephen. Next question is, thank you to everyone involved with SAREUM. At what stage in the development of 1801 and 1802 would be the preferred point to consider a license agreement?
Okay, so we've talked previously about our ongoing dialogue with interested partners, and we continue to assess the potential value of an earlier stage transaction versus the risks and the time and the funding required for a later stage deal. So it's all the time, it's a balance of the further down the development track you go, the higher the value of the potential deal is, and also that there's more companies out there looking for later stage deals generally than earlier stage deals. So it's really a judgment call by the board on how far we think we want to take the programs before we do license them on. But I think that there's pretty much a hard stop that we would never take a program into the market. So we'd at some stage during the at the latest, at the sort of mid to late clinical stage, we would be looking to license these on. But if the right deal comes along at an earlier stage, then of course we'll take it.
Great, thank you. Next question is about FLT3. Will there be any attempt to fix solubility issues on FLT3?
Shall I take it, John, or do you want to chip in?
Go ahead, and I'll add anything if there is anything.
Okay, great. So our current priorities are SDC 1801 and 1802. That's the two TYK2 JAK1 programs. So we've had several attempts to find ways of progressing FLT3 and Aurora with various partners, particularly in China. So I think where we are at the moment is that the program's deprioritized. If we will become aware of any new methodologies that would address the formulation issues that we have with FLT3, then we'd continue the program based on that. But I think at the moment we're just waiting to see, waiting to find a way to address these formulation issues before we progress any further.
Great, thank you. Next question, now that 1801 is heading to the clinic, what's the time frame for 1802 to do the same?
So I think it's really too early to give a definite frame for 1802 or time frame for 1802 to commence its clinical studies. We really need to complete the translational studies to determine these cancer indications for the molecule, and then we can plan to complete the studies, the preclinical studies, to get it into the clinic. But I think, as John noted in the presentation, 1802 is similar in structure, molecular structure, to 1801. So the experience that we gained from the preclinical studies on 1801 should be very much transferable and will facilitate the preclinical work on 1802.
Great, thank you. And then a further question on 1802. Will it be administered in the same capsule form as 1801?
So I think we'll assess both capsule and powder and bottle. And again, we can use the experience from our preclinical formulation studies on 1801 to guide us on this, as we said, as the molecules are quite similar. So, John, were you?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think the only other thing is we may have some of the clinical data on the capsule formulation of 1801 by the time we get to the stage of 1802, which obviously we'll use to guide our selection. I think capsules would be preferable. So, that's where my preference lies at the moment, but we'll assess it once we have all of the data on 1802 and go with the most appropriate formulation.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Next question is about patents, and do you have plans to extend the life of any of the older patents?
John, do you want to take that?
Yes, I will do. I mean, we have a strategy in place that maximises the lifetime of all of our patents as far as we can. So I think just on the older patents, a lot of them, some of them have served their purpose very well. So, which was to carve out an area of chemical space in which we could operate. And the strategy then was to file selection patents on the actual molecules of interest. And that's what we've done. So we've got, I think, good lifetime remaining on our patents for 1801 and 1802. And obviously, there are little tricks to extend the lifetime as much as possible. I mean, an example of that would be the crystallization or the solid form patent that you've seen for 1801, or you may have seen it. It's a patent that seeks to protect particular crystal forms of SDC 1801, and it starts the patent clock ticking again when we file that application. So yeah, we have a strategy in place to extend the lifetime of patents as far as is possible.
Great, thank you. Next question is about whether there are plans for anyone to attend the JAK Inhibitors Development Summit in Boston. Apologies if you've already. Apologies. The question was if you have attended.
Right. Yeah. Well, yes. Except that it became an online event. But I was. This is John speaking. I was at the event online, and it was very good. Some very interesting discussion about future therapeutic areas for JAK inhibitors, and discussion from physicians, but the people who actually prescribe the medicines, concerning the black box warnings around some of the earlier JAK inhibitors, which was very interesting. Yeah, that was interesting.
Great, thank you. I think that we have a few additional questions coming in on the chat. One was related to plans to carry out research on new molecules on the SKIL platform. And the question is, how many roughly are you looking at?
Yes, so I'll pick it up. It's Tim. So as we said, it's 1801 is our top priority, followed by 1802. So we're doing we're really concentrating on the progression of those molecules. But if the funding were available, or we had some particular ideas about how to progress new molecules coming out of the skill platform, that then we would pick that up. But at the moment, it's 1801 and 1802 are our top priorities.
Great. Then as an additional question on the chat, what are John's thoughts on the allosteric mechanism of inhibition versus 1801?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the deucravacitinib molecule from BMS looks to be working well in the clinic. It's giving good safety data. It's obviously a very selective method for inhibiting TYK2 only. I think where we're hoping there will be an advantage with our molecule is that we get the JAK1 inhibition as well alongside TYK2. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we think that could be very important in, for example, the interferon alpha signaling pathway, which relies on both TYK2 and JAK1 to inhibit that signal fully. And there are other opportunities where JAK1 plays a very important role in many inflammatory cytokines. So I think allosteric's a nice approach for pure TYK2, and there are several other companies going down that route. Nimbus, Arcutis. It's hard to know how they are going to differentiate their molecules from deucravacitinib. But anyway, that's their problem. But I think we're nicely differentiated with the additional JAK1 activity, which we believe will give us some has the potential to give us some efficacy advantages.
Great, thank you. I think that's the bulk of the questions asked already. So it might be a good time to hand back to Tim to wrap up now.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, so I think some of the questions posted live, I think we've covered off in the pre-submitted ones. There's others there that I think we need a more considered written answer to, which we will provide that during the next week or so. So really, it remains for me to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you for your questions, and we've certainly got a lot to look forward to here at SAREUM as we work through the Cta approval of SDC 1801 and start its clinical journey. So again, thank you very much for joining us.
That's great. Tim, John, Steve and Jessica, thank you ever so much for your time this morning and for updating investors. Can I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This may take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of SAREUM Holdings PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, and I wish you all a very pleasant morning.